Hi everyone! Today I will be telling you about my final project, which I have decided to conduct a social network analysis of early modern playwright-actor relationships, inspired by the relationship between playwright Thomas Otway and actress Elizabeth Barry. To begin, I'm going to research more about Miss Barry and explore who she was connected with. So first, I'll talk about a little bit about Elizabeth Barry and Thomas Otway. I was inspired to do this because I did my text encoding project on Thomas Otway's The Orphan. And as I began to delve into research about Thomas Otway, I discovered that one of his lead actresses, Elizabeth Barry, was very well connected in the early modern period, and she was actually known as a celebrity. So I thought this was really interesting because the more research I did, I realized that Thomas Otway became fascinated with Elizabeth Barry, and this is it became sort of a relationship, and that's why labeled this unrequited love, because from what I found, it seemed that Otway was fascinated by Barry, but she was involved with someone else, which I'll get into next. So, this was the man that Elizabeth Barry was actually romantically involved with, and this is John Wilmot, the second Earl of Rochester. He was a theater patron and court libertine, and they were known to have an intimate relationship. So, my next connection is Elizabeth Barry and William Shakespeare, and as I go through this, I'll be showing you as the network builds. So, I'll show you each connection at a time, and each new picture is a portrait of the new connection that I'll be talking about. So, this is a portrait of William Shakespeare, and Elizabeth Barry was simply connected with him through Shakespeare's play The Merry Wives of Windsor, in which she played Mistress Quickly. Next is Elizabeth Barry and playwright John Dryden. And as you go through, you'll also note on the left-hand side, I have a legend that describes the colors for each vertice, and that represents what that person did primarily. Like, for example, John Dryden was a playwright, so he's represented in blue here. And she played Cleopatra in his play All for Love. Next is Elizabeth Barry and the Earl of Moray. Again, she simply played Queen Isabella in his play Mustafa. Next, as I was researching, this happened to be one of the only female relationships that I found connected with Elizabeth Barry, and I found simply that she was friends with the Duchess of York. And I thought it was also interesting because as I researched more and more, I realized that she seemed very well connected, especially with the more noble class. And this could perhaps be due to her relationship with the Earl of Rochester, but I'm not exactly sure. Next is John Wilmot, the second Earl of Rochester, and Charles II. In my research, I found that John Wilmot was a confidant turned rival of Charles II, and I'm not really sure why. I would be interested to find more out about that. I find that very intriguing and curious as to what that actually means. But I also found that Charles II was very important for the theater industry during this period because he paved the way for women acting on stage. So he obviously had a very important role in Elizabeth Barry's career. Next is John Dryden and John Wilmot, again the second Earl of Rochester. John Dryden apparently dedicated Marriage a la Mode to John Wilmot in 1672. So they had a professional relationship. Next is John Dryden and Lord Mulgrave. And I simply found that these two are connected. Not sure how or why, but. Next is Lord Mulgrave and John Wilmot, and I actually found a lot of interesting information about these two and their relationship. I found that they were engaged in a duel. However, the Earl of Rochester, John Wilmot, refused to fight at the very last minute because he was not feeling well. And you can't see me doing quotes, but um, I've, that sounds like an excuse to me. And apparently, the truth was he was just afraid that Lord Mulgrave was too dangerous. Next is another female relationship that Elizabeth Barry had with Alfred Benn. And Alfred Benn was a female writer who developed dramatic roles, which Elizabeth Barry obviously specialized in. And these roles were written specifically for Miss Barry. Next is Charles II and Nell Gwynn. Nell Gwynn was actually Charles II's mistress, and she was also an actress. So I found this relationship interesting because this kind of goes along the model that I was originally looking for, which was the playwright actor relationship, which seemed pretty common at this time. Next is Thomas Otway and Charles Beauclerk. Charles Beauclerk was actually the illegitimate son of Charles II, and it is said that Otway earned a pretty steady income tutoring Charles Beauclerk. Next is Charles II and Charles Beauclerk, which I just mentioned. They are father-son. Next, we have Thomas Otway and John Dryden, and this concludes the social network that I have constructed. And Thomas Otway and John Dryden were simply related because John Dryden was a fan of Otway's plays and even wrote the prologue to Otway's Venice Preserved, which Elizabeth Barry performed in. So we've kind of come full circle with the network, and I'm sure there are many other connections, but I only had so much time and so much research to do, so this is what I found, and hopefully this gives you a better understanding of some of the big figures in early modern playwriting and acting during this time. And just for reference, here's a list of the actual connections, and I have labeled their relationships so you can see exactly how they were connected. So that concludes my presentation. Hopefully you learned something new. Thank you.